So in extrapolating all this data out and trying to mine it for valuable information, this is a sociogram. This is a representation of all the individuals from all the different groups clustered together. So you can see we've got lots and lots of people in different groups. Just based solely upon color, you can see where individuals reside. And all these different connections are representative of their relationship to others.
And you can sort of see where the groups interconnect at these sort of different points like this. Now, these are the people that are sort of connecting the groups together, which are key people that you want to know and find out more about.
So these aren't just loose groups with no real connection. Instead, there's some individuals who connect all these groups together in different fashions. And those would probably be the key people to identify because they know everyone, people look to them and want to pay attention to what they're saying. In taking each group, one of the things we wanted to understand is how these groups communicate with and across one another. And I don't know if you want to do the color on this or you want me to.
Why don't you do that?
So with this, the thicker the line, the more often they communicate. And you can see that there are certain triangles here, like the Hell Knight's crew, Damage Lab, and Cupsuit are all talking to one another, and there's pretty dense connections between them. Hackzona and Motherfucker are pretty highly connected, and Hackzona and Ruhack. But we have Zloy, who's not really well connected to any other group. The Buggerhucker crew and Damage Lab. In fact, Damage Lab seems to be a pretty important resource because they have somewhat thick ties to multiple other groups. So in general, we can use this as a means to understand how these groups are operating and communicating, who seems to be less relevant than others.
There are actually a couple of ways that you can use this thing. One way, which is if you were thinking about how is this exploit being sort of diffused to the community, you can sort of follow, you can find out where you found it last and then follow the broad line to figure out where's the highest probability where it came from before. The second thing is, if you're interested in perhaps doing something a bit more, less passive and more proactive, is if you want to get to Damage Lab, maybe you might get to one of the Hell Knights guys first, who's connected to the Damage Lab, and then you'll be able to eventually move into the denied territory of Damage Lab, for example. So these kinds of graphs are often useful for that kind of thing.
And one other thing, taking that risk level idea for just a moment, we can look at how popular an individual is and couch them in the larger network based on their friendship associations. So when we mapped out all of our individuals based on risk, the high-risk actors are the individuals who are very centered in this network, along with the moderate risk actors. So you can see these orange dots, these red dots, tend to be very centered in the entire network, with a larger distribution of these no-threat or unknown actors. There's a couple of no-risk players that we left out of some of the subsequent analyses. But what's important to note about all of this is that the high-risk players being so densely connected in the center means that everyone is looking to them for information. And so their popularity would suggest that these are individuals who lots of people know. And that ties back into this notion of diffusion of exploits. You go to them in order to find new things. And that might be why ideas are recycled to some degree, why there's not always a new variant of a very, very new tool. Instead, things kind of go and go and go in iteration. So this kind of graph helps to get at a little bit of an understanding of what are some of the social drivers for malware and hack attacks and other ones. So next up, we'll do the economics of the cybercrime market, and this kind of ties into what Christian was talking about a little bit earlier with regard to malicious software and distribution. This is actually a project that was funded by the National Institute of Justice in the U.S., myself and my colleagues, Dr. Gail Ahn at Arizona State and Bill Chu at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. We had a project funded to examine the problem of bots, and we did this in a couple of different ways. We used Honeynet technologies to examine bots in the wild, and then we did an analysis of forums. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, the grant number that's up here, we actually have a very dense report of around 200 pages posted online. Kind of the takeaways from this study, from a social point of view, are in thinking about how people gain access to different resources. You know, if you're interested in getting iframe traffic, or if you want to engage in DDoS but you don't have the skills, there's now this marketplace where you can go to purchase different resources. So you go to a forum, you look for different advertisements, and you can contact an individual privately. Most of them are using ICQ or in some cases email. Or there's a very, very small subset that will take private messages within the forum. But most are using some kind of public communication that they can encrypt or otherwise carefully monitor. And then they pay for services electronically. Web money is very popular. At one point in time, e-gold was a popular payment mechanism. Some do Yandex, and the more organized forums operate within escrow payment systems as well. So there's one person within the board who acts as a guarantor, somebody who holds money on behalf of a prospective buyer. When the seller releases product, then that money is transferred directly to that individual. So it's a way of ensuring trust between two individuals who might not know one another, who could very easily rip the other person off. So it's a way to guarantee everyone is pleased with the transaction. But again, that takes a certain degree of sophistication because you've got to trust that person in the first place to hold on to your money for you. So within the market, the sales process is very simple. You go into the forum. Some are closed that require registration. Others are somewhat open. It starts, and this is a quote directly from one of the sellers. You know me, or you knock me, you contact me in ICQ and explain what I need to do. After that, as soon as I complete your order, you transfer money into my web money purse, so into my account. After that, you receive the product. To familiars, if I've talked to you before, then I'll give you the product first. For everybody else, we work on this scheme. Money first, shares after. So only give me the money, then you'll get your product. And in looking at the different resources that were sold, this table pretty succinctly describes what we saw. A lot of malware being sold, 34% of all posts related to malware, 30% for cybercrime services, so this could be DDoS, spam distribution, hacking email accounts, setting up VPN or cracking VPN services, and doing web hosting. A lot of people sold ICQ numbers, 10% of our proportion sold ICQ. Anybody use ICQ in here? Couple of you, very limited. ICQ being free, it's kind of interesting to see these numbers for sale. And stolen personal information comprise 13% of the total, so this would be credit card numbers, malware logs, information that you could acquire, say passports or otherwise.
Banking information.
And looking at the cybercrime services end of things, this is where a lot of the interesting data comes up. So for example, DDoS services. For 1 hour average, the price was around $14.26, but they offered these tiered kind of pricing structures. So if you want to attack somebody for 7 days, we're going to knock the price down substantially. So in creating kind of average metrics, DDoS was pretty cheap. Spam services are relatively inexpensive. In fact, to send out spam for around 100,000 messages or more, it would be $50 average, so not very expensive. Going to these sites and acquiring services might even be more useful for the script kiddie because it's a way to engage in higher level or more complex attacks without having any knowledge necessary to really make the act happen on your own. Web hosting and services, so people having cracked servers in Malaysia or different parts of Southeast Asia were also common, so you could host malware or any other type of service that you found interesting. Sure.
Did you already also track like hardware that is being sold, like hardware printers?
We only saw 1 or 2 instances of printers. In terms of carding resources like credit card numbers, there's a small proportion of that in the total. But in terms of actual hardware, we saw very little, whether phones or computers or otherwise being sold. So, cybercrime services were relatively popular, and it's interesting, within this marketplace, we're talking about people selling access to technical resources. But the market is shaped by individuals, so participants have to trust and rely on one another. And so the way in which transactions took place were structured in part by things that you would see in a legitimate business marketplace. People have to trust that you're going to give them good product at a reasonable price. The lower the price, in fact, the more likely a person was to acquire long-term stable business. But customer service was also relevant. If you're going to buy credit card numbers from someone in this marketplace, if a proportion of them were dead or inactive, the good sellers would say, I'll offer you free replacements within 48 hours of your purchase. Others, if they offered web hosting, had 24-hour ICQ customer support lines. So you knock me here, our girl will take care of you. One group even was giving away free champagne on New Year's to their long-term clients as a means of saying, we respect you, we appreciate your business, thanks for working with us. So there's a stability and there's a sort of normal market dynamic that we see in this relatively irregular kind of space. And let me turn it over to Max now.